It was late at night when the plane landed at the airport in Abuja, the heavy, humid air of the city wrapping around the arriving passengers like a familiar blanket. The airport was still incredibly busy, buzzing with the chaotic energy of travelers reunited with loved ones, merchants shouting for attention, and the distant, rhythmic hum of engines. Through this sea of bustling humanity walked Mr. Afer Okake, stepping slowly through the arrival hall, with a worn but sturdy suitcase in one hand and a heavy duffel bag slung over his opposite shoulder. To any casual observer, he looked like a typical traveler returning from a long journey, perhaps a tired businessman, or a student coming back from studies abroad. But beneath that unassuming exterior lay a man whose life had fundamentally changed, a man who had left this very soil years ago, with nothing but a pocketful of dreams and a heart broken into a million pieces, only to return now as an extraordinarily successful billionaire. Yet, despite the immense wealth that now filled his bank accounts, despite the global empire he had built with his own two hands overseas, his eyes carried a profound, deep-seated exhaustion that no amount of money could ever cure. He moved with a quiet, deliberate dignity, his gaze scanning the crowds not out of fear, but out of a deeply ingrained habit of searching, always searching, for a face he feared he might never see again. As he stepped outside the airport terminal, the vibrant sounds of the Abuja night cascaded over him, and he hailed a local taxi, instructing the driver to take him to a luxury five-star hotel he had meticulously booked weeks before leaving his life abroad. During the drive, the city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and silver against the dark glass of the window, and Mr. Afor kept his eyes fixed on the passing landscape, his mind drifting far away into the painful, beautiful recesses of the past. He was thinking of her. He was always thinking of her, Nkechi, the woman whose love had been his anchor, the woman who had sacrificed everything so that he could fly, and the woman who had mysteriously vanished from his life after years of losing contact. It was an ache that time had failed to dull, a persistent question mark that overshadowed every single one of his professional triumphs. Because what was the point of conquering the world if you could not share it with the person who believed in you when you were absolutely nothing? The taxi eventually pulled up to the grand entrance of the five-star hotel, a magnificent architectural marvel adorned with glittering chandeliers and pristine marble floors that screamed opulence. Mr. Afer, having made his reservation a week earlier to ensure a flawless transition back into his homeland, walked inside with his bags, stepping straight to the reception desk where a sharp, impeccably dressed receptionist greeted him with a professional smile. "I have a reservation under the name Mr. Afer Okik," he said, his voice calm and carrying the subtle, refined cadence of someone who had spent years negotiating in global boardrooms. The receptionist nodded politely and began tapping away at her computer system, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, but as the seconds stretched into minutes, her professional smile began to falter, and a frown wrinkled her forehead. She checked the system once, she checked it again, and then she went through the database a third time as her face completely changed, losing its color as she looked up at the distinguished gentleman standing before her. "Sir, I am terribly sorry, but I cannot find your reservation anywhere in our active system," she said, her voice laced with a mixture of anxiety and defensiveness. Mr. Afer looked deeply confused, his brow furrowing as he placed his hands on the polished counter, refusing to believe that an establishment of this caliber could make such a fundamental error. "That is simply not possible," he replied, his tone remaining polite but firm as he reached into his pocket and brought out his phone. "I have the digital confirmation, the payment receipt, and the official proof right here on my screen," he added, showing her the booking details that clearly indicated a premium suite had been reserved and paid for in advance. The receptionist apologized profusely, immediately making frantic phone calls to the IT department and speaking in hushed, hurried whispers with her supervisor, who hurried over to assist with the escalating situation. After more intense checking, cross-referencing, and awkward phone calls between the front desk and the back-end staff, they finally managed to uncover the root of the problem. "There was a severe technical issue on our website on the exact day you made your transaction, sir," the supervisor explained, his voice dripping with forced corporate regret. "Some bookings unfortunately did not enter our primary database correctly, and because of that glitch, your room was inadvertently released and rebooked by another VIP guest." Mr. Afor stayed completely quiet for a long moment, the exhaustion of his long-haul flight finally catching up to him, making the luxury surroundings feel incredibly cold and unwelcoming. "So, what exactly does that mean for me right now?" he asked, his quiet voice cutting through the supervisor's nervous explanations. The receptionist lowered her voice, unable to look him in the eye. "It means your reservation is not in our system, and we are completely helpless tonight." Mr. Afor's face changed, a shadow of profound frustration crossing his features as he looked around the bustling, prestigious lobby. "Is there absolutely no other room available? Even a standard one or a smaller suite?" he asked, willing to compromise just to get a few hours of uninterrupted rest. The receptionist shook her head slowly, expression genuinely apologetic. "All rooms are completely full tonight due to a major international conference being hosted in the city, sir. We literally do not have a single bed available." For a moment, Mr. Afer said absolutely nothing, letting the silence hang heavily in the air as he realized that all his money and status meant nothing in the face of a simple computer error. Then, without causing a scene or raising his voice, he picked up his heavy bags, turned away from the reception desk, and walked back outside into the cool night air, leaving the glittering five-star hotel behind him. He stopped another taxi that was waiting near the curb, throwing his luggage into the back before climbing into the rear seat with a sigh. "Take me to the nearest decent hotel. Anywhere clean and quiet where I can get a room for the night," he told the driver, who nodded understandingly as he shifted the car into gear. The vehicle moved through the labyrinthine streets of Abuja for a while, turning away from the ultra-luxurious diplomatic quarters and heading into a slightly older, middle-class neighborhood. Finally, they pulled up and stopped at another hotel, which, while lacking the grand, intimidating opulence of the five-star establishment, looked thoroughly good, professional, and remarkably clean. Mr. Afor went inside, paid for a standard room at the front desk without any further complications, and collected his plastic key card from the clerk. That night he was so profoundly tired that his bones literally ached. He entered the room, tossed his bags into a corner, threw himself onto the bed, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep within seconds. The next morning, the bright African sun began to filter through the edges of the curtains, and Mr. Afor woke up feeling slightly more grounded, though the heavy emotional weight in his chest remained unchanged. He got out of bed and went straight into the bathroom to take a quick, refreshing shower, hoping the warm water would wash away the lingering jet lag and clear his mind for the busy days ahead. While he was inside the shower, the distant sound of a polite, hesitant knock echoed from the front door of his hotel room, followed by a woman's voice coming softly from outside. "Good morning, it is the hotel housekeeping and cleaner. Can I come in to tidy up and change the linens?" "Inside the bathroom, Mr." Afer froze mid-motion, the bar of soap slipping slightly in his hand as the sound of that voice pierced through the ambient noise of the rushing water. Something about the cadence, the pitch, the gentle inflection of that voice felt so deeply, undeniably familiar, sending a sudden shiver down his spine, but in his sleep-deprived state he simply could not place it. He shook his head, thinking his mind was merely playing cruel tricks on him because of how intensely he had been reminiscing during the journey home. He turned off the shower faucet and spoke loudly from inside the bathroom so she could hear him through the door. "The main door is open. Please come in, thank you," he called out. "Thank you, sir," the replied softly from the bedroom, and he heard the sound of the door opening and closing as the cleaner entered to begin her morning chores. He continued drying himself off, stepping out of the shower stall and wrapping a clean white towel around his waist, completely unaware that his life was about to alter its trajectory forever. After some time, he finished up in the bathroom, dried his hair, and stepped out into the main bedroom area, standing in front of the bathroom door while wiping water from his head with a smaller towel. Then, he looked casually into the room, expecting to see a standard hotel employee going about their mundane daily routine. The cleaner was inside, her back partially turned to him as she diligently arranged the sheets, pulling the heavy blanket tight over the mattress with practiced, weary movements. She stood with her side facing him, her shoulders slumped slightly from what looked like years of hard, back-breaking labor, wearing a simple, faded uniform that belonged to the establishment. Mr. Afer suddenly stopped moving entirely, his hands staying frozen on top of his head, the towel slipping slightly from his fingers as an intense electric shock ran through his entire body. He looked at her closely, his heart beginning to hammer violently against his ribs as his eyes traced the profile of her face, the shape of her jaw, the way her hair was pinned back. Something about her felt so agonizingly familiar that it took his breath away, making his knees feel suddenly weak. He slowly walked closer, step by step, his bare feet making no sound on the carpeted floor, as if he were approaching a ghost that might vanish if he moved too quickly. The closer he got, the stronger, the more overwhelming the feeling became, until the familiar scent of her skin, mixed with the cheap hotel detergent, hid his senses. Then she turned her head slightly to smooth out a pillow, and he saw her face clearly in the morning light. And in that exact microsecond, Mr. Afor's entire body went completely still, his breath catching in his throat. It was her, it was really her, Nkechi, the woman he had searched for through private investigators and endless phone calls for many agonizing years. The woman who had literally sacrificed her own future and given him her life savings to help him leave the country. She was the woman he had passionately loved, the woman he had formerly planned to marry, and the one true love he had never, not even for a single second, stopped looking for while he was building his billionaire empire overseas. Now, by some twisted, incomprehensible act of fate or karma, she was standing right there in front of him, reduced to a common hotel cleaner, scrubbing floors, and making beds for strangers in a mid-tier establishment. His voice, thick with a powerful cocktail of shock, disbelief, and a breaking heart, came out softly, barely a whisper through the quiet room. "Nkechi," he said. The woman stopped what she was doing instantly, her entire frame freezing, as if she had been struck by lightning, the sudden utterance of her name in that specific, unforgettable voice, sending a tremor through her spine. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, she turned around to face the source of the voice, and her tired, weary eyes met his sharp, tear-filled gaze. The cleaning cloth in her hand dropped limply to the floor, forgotten as her jaw slacked in absolute, paralyzing disbelief. For a long, painful moment she froze, her eyes scanning his face, recognizing the man she had loved and lost, the man who had disappeared into the vastness of the world overseas. "Offer," she said in a low, trembling voice that cracked under the sheer weight of the emotional dam breaking inside her. Mr. Afer stood completely still, tears finally spilling over his eyelids. "Nkechi," he said again, taking another step forward, his hands reaching out instinctively. Her eyes locked onto him, and in an instant the overwhelming shock, the years of hidden pain, the physical exhaustion of her secret illness, and the sheer impossibility of the moment became too much for her fragile body to bear. Her body went entirely weak, her vision blurred, and her knees completely gave way beneath her. "Nkechi," he shouted in pure panic, his billionaire status vanishing as he became just a desperate man trying to save the woman he loved. She started falling toward the hard floor, but he quickly ran forward with explosive speed, catching her securely in his strong arms before she could impact the ground, pulling her fragile, surprisingly light frame tightly against his chest. "Nkechi, please open your eyes. Look at me. I'm here," he pleaded. But she did not respond. Her eyes closed tightly as she drifted into unconsciousness. He looked around the room in a state of absolute, frantic panic, his heart racing like a wild animal. "Somebody help me, please, help," he shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing down the hotel corridor. Within moments, hearing the desperate screams, several hotel staff members and managers rushed into the room, their eyes widening at the sight of a guest cradling their unconscious cleaning lady on the floor. "She fainted, she just completely passed out," one of the housekeepers said, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. "Call for emergency help. Call an ambulance immediately," another staff member shouted, confusion and chaos taking over the room. Mr. Afor, ignoring the frantic chatter around him, held her tightly against his chest, rocking her slightly as tears streamed down his face. "Wake up, Nkechi. Please wake up," he said again and again, his voice cracking with an intense emotional agony, but she stayed completely still, pale and unresponsive in his arms. Realizing that waiting for an ambulance in the congested traffic of Abuja could take far too long, and refusing to let her safety depend on chance, he lifted her up effortlessly, cradling her protectively against his chest. "Where is the nearest hospital? Tell me exactly where the closest hospital is right now," he asked urgently, his tone commanding and leaving absolutely no room for hesitation or delay. The terrified hotel manager quickly gave him the directions to a nearby medical center, and without a second thought, still wrapped in his towel and throwing on a shirt, Mr. Afor rushed out of the building with her in his arms. His heart was incredibly heavy, a suffocating mixture of profound joy and devastating sorrow washing over him, because after many long, painful years of relentless searching, He had finally found his beloved Nkechi, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this day, and seeing her in this heartbreaking, fragile condition shattered his soul into pieces. At the hospital waiting area, the environment was sterile, cold, and smelled strongly of antiseptic, creating a stark and depressing backdrop for the unfolding drama. Mr. Afer stood near the admission desk for what felt like a lifetime, the minutes dragging on like hours as the medical team wheeled Nkechi away behind double doors for emergency treatment. He could not bring himself to sit down, his legs moving in a restless, anxious rhythm as he just kept standing there, looking completely lost and broken despite his immense wealth and global power. His mind was not calm. It was a chaotic storm of conflicting emotions, questions, and a profound sense of injustice that threatened to consume him entirely. He had just miraculously found Nkechi again after so many years of silence, but she was not the vibrant, smiling woman he had left behind. She was a destitute cleaner in a random hotel. And now, instead of celebrating their reunion, she was lying critically ill inside a stark hospital room, fighting for her consciousness while he stood outside, feeling utterly helpless. He felt deeply confused. He felt hurt to his very core, and he had so many burning questions in his heart that demanded immediate answers. Unable to cope with the suffocating walls of the indoor waiting room, he stepped out of the area and began walking slowly around the hospital compound, the bright sun doing nothing to warm the icy fear in his chest. He could not stay still, his hands clenching and unclenching as he paced the concrete walkways, and as he walked, the floodgates of memory opened wide, and vivid flashbacks from their shared past came rushing back to torment him. Many years ago, long before the billions, long before the overseas degrees and the corporate success, life had looked entirely different for both of them. After graduating from school, Mr. Afor and Nkechi had found themselves thrust into the harsh reality of a depressed economy, both of them searching desperately for any kind of meaningful work to survive. Life was not easy for both of them. They faced daily rejections, empty pockets, and the constant, grinding stress of poverty in the city. But through it all, they stayed fiercely together. They loved each other deeply, with a pure, unadulterated devotion that did not depend on material wealth or societal status, finding comfort and strength purely in each other's arms. At that difficult time, Mr. Afor did not have much money at all, struggling to pay for basic meals and living in a small, cramped one-room apartment in a neglected part of town. Every single weekend, without fail, Nkechi would visit him in that tiny room, her presence instantly transforming the bleak space into a sanctuary of hope and warmth. She always brought small things she had managed to scrape together, a little food, a fresh shirt, or just a bright smile, to help him feel better and keep his spirits from breaking under the weight of poverty. They would sit together on his small mattress for hours, holding hands in the fading light, and talk passionately about their grand dreams for the future, promising to conquer the world together. Later on, fortune seemed to smile on them slightly as they both managed to secure entry-level jobs, providing a small glimmer of stability to their struggling lives. Nkechi, due to her sharp mind and dedication, actually landed a significantly better-paying job at a reputable firm, which brought a sense of relief to their shared financial burdens. They both worked diligently, pouring their hearts into their respective roles and pooling their resources, meticulously planning their future marriage and saving every spare kobo for a home of their own. But then, out of nowhere, something unexpected happened that would alter the course of their lives forever and set this tragic chain of events into motion. One ordinary morning at Mr. Afor's workplace, as he was going about his daily duties, he walked past a colleague's desk and saw something that immediately caught his attention. His close friend was intensely focused, carefully filling out complicated application forms for a highly prestigious, fully funded scholarship to study abroad in the United Kingdom. Mr. Afer became deeply curious, a spark of ambition igniting in his chest as he stood over his friend's shoulder, watching him handle the official documents. He asked his friend about the details, wondering if it was just another internet scam or a genuine opportunity that could change a person's destiny. His friend looked up, smiled, and explained with absolute certainty that the program was completely real, backed by a major international foundation. He said, "If you pass the rigorous entry test and interview, you can study abroad for a master's degree entirely for free, and it opens doors you can't even imagine back home." Mr. Afer listened carefully, his heart thumping as the words echoed in his mind. and that grand, intoxicating idea stayed firmly planted in his thoughts for days. A few weeks later, something truly surprising and definitive happened that shattered any lingering doubts Mr. Afour had about the opportunity. His friend, the very one who had been filling out the forms, received his official acceptance letter and visa sponsorship for the program, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the dream was tangible. That was the exact moment when Mr. Afour truly believed it was real, and a burning desire took hold of him. He had always dreamed of going abroad, not just for an elite education, but to escape the suffocating cycle of poverty and build a legendary life. So, fueled by a sudden burst of hope but still harboring a deep fear of failure, he decided to quietly try his luck and submit an application of his own. However, because he didn't want to raise anyone's hopes or face the humiliation of rejection, he did not take it entirely seriously at first, treating it as a long shot. He filled out the online forms late at night and applied without even telling Nkechi, rationalizing that there was no need to worry her with something that had a 1 in a million chance of happening. He honestly thought nothing would ever come out of it, expecting his application to be buried under thousands of others from across the continent. But then, on a crisp morning that he would remember for the rest of his life, something miraculous happened that completely disrupted his reality. One morning, right after waking up, he casually checked his phone and saw a new notification, a formal email sitting at the top of his inbox from the International Scholarship Board. He clicked it with trembling fingers, and as he read the words, his breath left him entirely. He had been officially accepted into the highly competitive master's program. Mr. Afour could not believe his eyes, his mind spinning in circles as he kept reading the message again and again, checking the name to ensure it wasn't a mistake. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, a massive, seemingly insurmountable problem reared its ugly head, threatening to crush his dream before it could even begin. The prestigious scholarship would only cover his academic school fees and tuition. It did not provide a stipend for travel expenses, visa fees, flight tickets, or initial accommodation costs. He still desperately needed a significant amount of money to actually board that plane and survive those first few months abroad, an amount he did not have. That evening, carrying the heavy weight of this bittersweet news, after closing from work, he called Nkechi and asked her to come urgently to his small apartment. He told her over the phone, his voice strained, that he had something of monumental importance to tell her, refusing to give details until they were face to face. Later that day, Nkechi arrived at his doorstep, her face practically glowing, full of intense curiosity and a playful excitement as she wondered what could be so urgent. She kept asking him eagerly what the big news was, laughing as she teased him about his serious expression. But Mr. Afour simply sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, gesturing for her to join him. With a heavy sigh, he took her hands in his and explained everything from the very beginning, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and anxiety. He told her about his colleague at work, he told her about the international scholarship program, and he confessed how he had applied on a whim without expecting anything to come of it. Then, holding his breath, he told her the unbelievable final result. He had been accepted to study for his master's degree overseas. Nkechi's face instantly lit up with pure, unadulterated joy upon hearing the news, a radiant smile spreading across her beautiful features as she stood up quickly and hugged him tightly around the neck. "Oh my God, Afour, I am so incredibly proud of you. I always knew you were destined for greatness," she cried out, her voice filled with a pride that came from the very depths of her soul. For a brief, beautiful moment, everything felt happy and perfect, a celebration of a bright future that seemed within their grasp. Then, suddenly, Mr. Afour became completely quiet, his broad shoulders slumping as his face changed into an expression of profound sorrow and defeat. Nkechi, being deeply attuned to his every emotion, noticed the sudden shift immediately. She stepped back, moved closer again, and gently touched his cheek, asking him what was wrong. Mr. Afour took a deep, shaky breath, looking down at his worn shoes because he couldn't bear to look into her hopeful eyes. "My dear, my love," he said slowly, "you know my financial situation. You know how hard things are for me right now." He explained to her, with a voice full of shame, that his current salary was far too small to save anything substantial, that he was essentially living hand to mouth. He told her that he could not afford the massive travel expenses, the expensive flight tickets, or the mandatory pocket money required by the embassy, and the scholarship did not cover a single cent of it. He said he only had a few short months before the strict travel deadline, and without that money, his admission would be completely cancelled and his dream would die. Nkechi's beautiful smile slowly faded from her lips, the joyous energy evaporating from the room as a heavy suffocating silence fell over the cramped space. Mr. A4 looked deeply worried, his head in his hands as he felt like his ultimate dream, his one ticket to a better life, was slipping away through his fingers like sand. But Nkechi, proving the incredible depth of her character, did not stay silent or defeated for long. She moved closer, sat right beside him, and firmly held his trembling hand in hers. "We will do it together, do you hear me?" she said, her voice filled with a fierce, unwavering determination that startled him. "We are a team, A4, and we are in this together, no matter how hard it gets." Then she looked deeply into his eyes and told him something that would completely change the trajectory of both their lives and cement her ultimate sacrifice. She said that over the past few years of working her stable job, she had been secretly and meticulously accumulating some significant personal savings, money she had intended for their future home. She looked at him with absolute resolve and declared that she would give him every single kobo of those savings to finance his travel abroad. Mr. Offer looked at her in absolute, paralyzing shock, his eyes wide as he tried to process the magnitude of what she was offering to do for him. "Are you completely sure about this, Nkechi?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is your entire life savings, your security, everything you've worked for." Nkechi held his hand even tighter, her eyes shining with tears of pure devotion. "When it comes to you and your future, Fafer, I am more sure than I've ever been of anything in my entire life," she said softly. "I love you with all my heart, I believe in your brilliance, and I know with every fiber of my being that you will not fail me." Mr. Afer looked at her for a very long time, overwhelmed by a love so profound that it felt almost sacred. "I love you too, Nkechi, more than life itself," he said, the tears finally flowing freely down his face. That unforgettable night, holding her close in that small room, he made a solemn sacred promise to her. He swore to her that he would never, ever disappoint her sacrifice, promising that once finished his studies, he would work day and night to build a legendary future for them, and he would return to make her his queen. Nkechi agreed, her heart full of trust, because she believed in his integrity and his love with a blind, beautiful faith that asked for nothing in return. From that pivotal moment onward, they started planning everything together, turning their shared hope into a concrete strategy to get him on that plane. Nkechi, without a single moment of hesitation or regret, went to her bank and withdrew her entire savings, handing the massive sum over to him. It was not a small amount at all. In fact, what she selflessly gave him was far more than what Afer himself had ever been able to raise in his entire life, completely clearing the path for his departure. A few days before he was scheduled to leave, Mr. Afer took a small portion of his remaining funds, went to a jeweler, and bought a beautiful, modest engagement ring. He took Nkechi to a quiet spot, got down on one knee, and formally proposed to her, placing the ring on her finger as a physical symbol of his eternal promise and loyalty to her. Finally, the fateful day of departure arrived, and they traveled to the airport together, the atmosphere heavy with the impending separation. It was an incredibly emotional, tear-filled moment as they stood in the bustling terminal, holding each other so tightly that it felt as if they were trying to fuse their souls together. Neither of them wanted to let go, the fear of the unknown whispering cruel doubts in their ears. But eventually, the final boarding call echoed through the speakers, and Mr. Afer had to leave, walking through the security gates while Nkechi waved through her tears until he disappeared from sight. Back in the grim reality of the present day, Mr. Afer suddenly stopped his pacing, the painful memories dissipating as he found himself back in the cold hospital compound. He turned around, his heart still incredibly heavy, and walked back to the indoor waiting area, sinking heavily into one of the plastic chairs. Then the double doors clicked open, and a distinguished doctor in a white lab coat walked into the waiting room, looking around purposefully like he was searching for the person who brought the cleaner in. Mr. Afor quickly stood up, his billionaire commanding presence returning instantly as he rushed toward the medical professional. "Doctor, please, how is she? Is she going to be okay?" he asked, his voice laced with an intensity that made the doctor blink in surprise. The doctor looked incredibly serious, holding a clipboard with various test results attached to it, his expression offering no immediate comfort. "We ran a comprehensive series of emergency tests on her," the doctor said, choosing his words carefully. We initially wanted to just ensure her vital signs were stable after the severe physical shock and fainting spell she experienced. Mr. Afor listened with absolute undivided attention, his entire body tensing as he prepared for the worst. Then the doctor paused, looked directly into Mr. Afor's eyes and continued, "But during our examination, we unfortunately found something far more concerning than simple exhaustion." Mr. Afor became completely quiet, the ambient noise of the hospital fading away, as a cold dread settled deep in his stomach. The doctor spoke again, his tone dropping into a somber cadence. "She is suffering from a very severe, advanced illness, and it has been growing silently inside her body for a very long time, completely untreated, Mr." Afer's eyes widened slightly in horror, a gasp escaping his lips as the sheer injustice of her situation hit him like a physical blow. The doctor's voice became even more serious, leaving no room for false hope. "The condition has reached a critical stage, sir, and she will need a highly complicated surgery as soon as humanly possible if she is to survive." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the waiting room, the weight of the diagnosis crushing down on Mr. Afor's shoulders as he struggled to process the devastating news. He could not speak for a long moment, his chest feeling incredibly tight, as if a giant hand were squeezing the very breath out of his lungs. Then, swallowing the lump of fear in his throat, he finally managed to ask the doctor a burning question. "Is she awake right now? Can I talk to her?" he asked, his voice trembling. The doctor nodded slowly, his expression softening slightly at the sight of the man's obvious, profound distress. "Yes, she has regained consciousness, but she is extremely weak and currently resting in the recovery ward," he replied. Mr. Afor did not wait for another second. He signaled for the doctor to lead the way, and he followed him closely through the sterile hallways toward the intensive care unit. Mr. Afor slowly, hesitantly entered the quiet hospital ward, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he stepped through the door. The room was profoundly quiet, save for the rhythmic, automated beep of a heart monitor that echoed softly in the corner of the small space. Ketchy lay weakly on the stiff hospital bed, her fragile form swallowed up by the oversized white linens, her eyes closed as she rested. Mr. Afer stopped dead in his tracks for a moment, standing a few feet away from the bed, and looked at her carefully with a gaze full of unendurable pain. His heart became heavy, heavier than it had ever been during all his years of lonely struggle overseas, because the sight before him was absolutely devastating. She had become incredibly lean, her cheekbones protruding sharply, and her skin, which used to be so radiant and full of life, looked completely pale, drained, and utterly tired. This was simply not the vibrant, energetic Ninkechi he remembered from his youth. The woman lying helplessly on that bed looked like someone whom life had dealt with in the most brutal, unforgiving manner possible. Mr. Afer quietly pulled a plastic chair closer to the bedside, sitting down beside her with absolute care so as not to disturb her rest, his eyes never leaving her face. He kept staring at her, a million agonizing questions filling his brilliant mind, torturing his thoughts as he tried to bridge the massive gap of their missing years. What on earth happened to her after he left the country? How did her promising life become reduced to this heartbreaking state of destitution? Why was she a brilliant university graduate with a stellar corporate track record, working as a manual cleaner in a mid-tier hotel for pennies? The more he looked at her thin, pale face, the more intense, burning pain he felt in his heart, a wave of guilt washing over him because he had been living in luxury while she suffered in silence. Suddenly, as if sense powerful presence, Nkechi moved slightly beneath the thin blanket, her fingers twitching against the sheets. Mr. Afer quickly leaned forward, his entire focus locking onto her face as her eyelids began to flutter open. Slowly, painfully, her eyes opened fully, and she looked around the unfamiliar room weakly, her disoriented mind trying to comprehend exactly where she was and how she got there. Then her wandering gaze stopped, locking directly onto Mr. Afor, who was sitting right beside her, his tear-filled eyes staring back at her with an intensity that shook her to her core. Immediately upon seeing him, her pale face changed once again into an expression of absolute, paralyzing shock, her breath hitching in her throat. Even now, waking up in a hospital bed, she still could not bring herself to believe that he was truly sitting there, real and tangible beside her. Mr. Afor quickly leaned closer, his hand reaching out to gently smooth her hair. Hey, please calm down, don't strain yourself," he said softly, his voice a soothing balm in the quiet room. "It's me, Nkechi. It's really me, Afor. I'm right here with you now. and I promise you that everything is going to be completely fine." Nkechi kept staring at him, her lips trembling as tears slowly gathered in the corners of her eyes, tracking down her pale cheeks. "Afor," she said weakly, her voice barely a raspy whisper that carried a universe of pain. "Yes, my love," he replied gently, taking her frail hand into his large, warm palms. "It's really me, I came back for you." She looked at him again, blinking rapidly as if she expected him to vanish like a cruel mirage. Then, slowly, with an immense physical effort, she stretched out her trembling hand and touched his face, her fingers brushing against his jawline to confirm he wasn't a dream. "You are really here, you're not a ghost," she whispered, a sob escaping her throat. Mr. Afor held her hand carefully against his cheek, kissing her palm. "Yes, I am here and I am never leaving you again," he promised. For a few powerful seconds, neither of them spoke a single word, the sheer magnitude of their reunion paralyzing their tongues as they simply looked deep into each other's eyes. Years of silence, distance, and suffering had passed between them, but somehow, in that brief, sacred moment, the connection remained unbroken, though it felt entirely unreal to both of them. Mr. Afor could see 1,000 burning questions swirling in her tearful eyes, but he was far more worried about her critical medical condition than satisfying his own curiosity. He spoke softly, his voice dropping into a serious register. "The doctor told me about your condition, Nkechi. He said you were already very, very sick before you fainted today." Nkechi lowered her eyes slightly, a shadow of shame and resignation crossing her face. "Mr. Afor continued, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "He told me that you need a major urgent surgery to save your life, Nkechi." For a long moment, Nkechi stayed completely quiet, staring down at the hospital blanket as she gathered the strength to speak. Then she finally spoke, her voice flat. "I already know about it, Afor." Mr. Afor looked at her carefully, his heart breaking even further. "You knew? You knew you were this sick?" Nkechi gave a weak, tired reply, nodding her head slightly. "Yes, I found out about the illness several years ago." Mr. Afor became completely silent, stunned by her admission. Nkechi continued speaking slowly, pausing frequently because she looked incredibly weak and tired. "I have been trying desperately to save every single kobo for the expensive surgery, Afor." She paused briefly, swallowing hard before speaking again. "That is the only reason why I swallowed my pride and started working long hours as a cleaner at that hotel, just to raise the funds." Mr. Afor felt an even more profound agonizing pain hearing that confession, realizing that while he was accumulating billions, the woman who made it possible was cleaning toilets just to stay alive. He looked at her thin, malnourished face again, and suddenly, many confusing things started making complete sense to him. He wanted to ask her so many questions, wanting to know what had happened to the high-paying corporate job she possessed before he traveled abroad. But, looking at how fragile she was, he stopped himself, knowing she was too weak for an interrogation. Even while speaking those few sentences, she kept letting out soft, suppressed sounds of physical pain that cut through his heart like a knife. Kechi also looked like she wanted to ask him a million things about his wealth and his absence, but her physical exhaustion took over, and she stayed quiet. Mr. Afor gently adjusted the heavy hospital blanket, covering her shoulders carefully. "Please, my love, just rest for now," he said softly. Nkechi looked at him quietly, her eyes full of a deep, lingering sadness, and then slowly she closed her eyes again, drifting back into a much-needed sleep. Afor stayed there for some moments, watching her peaceful face, before he finally stood up, his expression hardening into one of absolute unyielding determination as he left the ward. He walked straight to the chief doctor's office, knocking firmly before entering without waiting for an invitation. The doctor looked up and welcomed him inside, sensing the powerful commanding aura that surrounded the man. "Doctor, Mr. Afor said, his tone commanding and serious. "I want you to tell me absolutely everything about her condition. Lay it all out." The doctor nodded and explained her complex medical situation carefully, detailing the exact nature of the surgery she required and stressing how soon it had to be performed to avoid fatal complications. Mr. Afor listened to the lengthy explanation without interrupting a single time, his sharp mind absorbing every detail. Then, he looked the doctor dead in the eye and asked, "What do you need from me right now to begin the preparations immediately?" The doctor looked at him, somewhat surprised by his aggressive urgency. "Well, there are substantial upfront payments, administrative clearances, and expensive medical preparations that must be handled before we can schedule the theater, sir." "Mr. Afor replied without a single second of hesitation, pulling out a premium black credit card. Prepare everything right now? Money is absolutely not an issue. The doctor looked thoroughly surprised for a moment, staring at the exclusive card. You want us to begin the process immediately, without waiting for insurance or standard verification? Yes, Mr. Afer answered firmly, his voice cutting through any bureaucratic hesitation. I do not want a second of delay. Do whatever it takes. For the next several minutes, Mr. Afor handled everything with the efficiency of a seasoned executive, making massive payments, signing legal documents, and asking sharp questions about the surgical team. Then, before leaving the office, he turned to the doctor one last time, his voice thick with emotion. Please, I am begging you, do everything humanly possible to save her life. The doctor, recognizing the profound love driving the man, replied calmly and reassuringly, We will do our absolute best, sir. You have my word. After speaking with the doctor, Mr. Afor finally left the hospital compound for a short while to change his clothes and arrange his affairs, his mind entirely focused on her survival. That very same day, thanks to his immense financial intervention, the extensive preparations for Nkechi's surgery began immediately without the typical delays that plague regular citizens. Doctors and specialized nurses moved efficiently in and out of Nkechi's ward, administering pre-op medications and stabilizing her vitals. By the time evening fell over the city, a team of medical professionals arrived at her bedside, and Nkechi was slowly, carefully wheeled out of the room, heading down the long corridor toward the operating theater. As the mobile hospital bed moved through the hallway, Mr. Afer walked alongside it, holding her hand until they reached the double doors of the surgical suite where he was forced to stop. Watching the doors close behind her, one powerful, desperate thought stayed incredibly heavy in Mr. Afer's heart, a silent prayer echoing in his mind. Lord, please preserve her life. I have just found her, after all these years, and I absolutely cannot afford to lose her now. The grueling surgery lasted for several intense hours, during which Mr. Afor paced the floor relentlessly, but finally the red light above the door turned off, and the lead surgeon stepped out with a tired but victorious smile. The surgery was a complete success, but the doctor went on to explain that due to the advanced nature of her prior neglect, she would still need to remain in the hospital for proper, intensive monitoring. She still needs absolute, uninterrupted rest, the doctor said, wiping his brow. We want to watch very closely how her fragile body responds to the treatment over the next few days to ensure no infections arise. Mr. Afer listened to every word with intense relief, a massive weight lifting from his chest. Will she be completely okay, doctor? He asked, needing to hear it one more time. The doctor replied calmly. Yes, she is a strong woman. The surgery went exceptionally well, and she will make a full recovery. Mr. Afer finally felt a little genuine relief, a tear of gratitude slipping down his cheek. For the next 4 days, Nkechi remained confined to the hospital bed, slowly regaining her strength under the watchful eyes of the best medical staff money could buy. And during those 4 crucial days, Mr. Afer stayed incredibly busy outside the hospital walls, utilizing his immense wealth to prepare a surprise that would completely transform her reality. A few months before he had even boarded the plane to return to the country, he had already been in constant communication and making elaborate arrangements with a top-tier luxury real estate company in the capital. He had commissioned them to secure a fully furnished, ultra-modern mansion in one of the most exclusive high-security choice areas of Abuja, fitting for a man of his status. Now, with Nkechi recovering, he finally completed the massive final payment, finalizing the legal transfers in a matter of hours. The real estate company director smiled broadly as he handed over the heavy gold-plated keys and title deeds to him that same afternoon. Congratulations, Mr. O'Cake, this magnificent estate officially belongs to you now, and everything is fully prepared for your arrival. Mr. Afer collected the keys quietly, a sense of deep satisfaction washing over him, knowing that he finally had a proper sanctuary to bring his love home to. At the exact same time, a luxury high-end car he had meticulously purchased and shipped into the country months earlier had finally cleared Port Authority and arrived in the city. His clearing agent called him on the phone, his voice excited. Sir, your luxury vehicle has just been delivered to the city depot and is completely ready for pickup, Mr. Afor went to complete the final paperwork and collect the vehicle immediately, watching the sleek, expensive car gleam in the sunlight as it was handed over to him. Everything in his professional and financial life seemed to be falling into place with absolute perfection, a testament to his immense global success. But even with all the staggering wealth, the expensive assets, and the material success surrounding him, his mind still stayed entirely focused on Nkechi's recovery. 4 days later, early in the morning, Mr. A4 drove his brand new luxury car to the hospital, his heart light with anticipation as he walked up to her ward. After checking Nkechi's vitals carefully and reviewing her chart, the attending doctor smiled slightly at Mr. A4. She is responding beautifully to the post-op treatment. Her strength is returning rapidly, he said. Mr. A4 looked deeply relieved, a bright smile breaking across his handsome face. So does that mean she can finally go home today? He asked eagerly. Yes, the doctor replied, nodding his approval. She is perfectly fine to leave the hospital today, but remember, she still needs proper, absolute rest, and no strenuous activity for the next few weeks, Mr. A4 thanked the doctor profusely, shaking his hand firmly before walking back into the ward with a spring in his step. Nkechi was already sitting up quietly on the edge of the bed, dressed in clean clothes he had provided, looking remarkably better, though still a bit fragile. You are finally going home today, my love, he said softly, walking over to her side. Nkechi looked up at him, a look of confusion clouding her eyes as she processed his words. Home, she repeated slowly, her voice laced with anxiety, because she knew her tiny, dilapidated rented room was no place to recover from a major surgery, Mr. A4 smiled faintly, a mischievous glint in his eyes as he gently took her hand. Yes, home, he said, carefully helping her stand up from the hospital bed, supporting her weight with absolute tenderness. You have to move very slowly, take your time, he told her protectively. I'm okay, A4. I feel much stronger today, Nkechi replied with a small smile, but she still gratefully supported herself against his strong arm as they walked out of the ward together. When they finally reached the outside exit of the hospital, Nkechi stopped dead in her tracks for a long moment, her eyes widening in absolute awe after seeing the car parked directly in front of the entrance. The vehicle looked incredibly expensive, a masterpiece of modern engineering that screamed wealth and sophistication, the kind of car she had only ever seen in foreign movies or transport high-ranking politicians. She slowly turned her head to look at him, her eyes full of unspoken questions, but Mr. A4 simply smiled, stepped forward, and opened the passenger door wide for her. Careful now, he said gently, helping her slide onto the premium leather seat and closing the door softly before walking around to the driver's side and climbing in. Soon, they left the hospital compound behind, entering the bustling, chaotic roads of Abuja as cars and pedestrians moved in a frantic dance around them. Inside the air-conditioned car, a heavy, profound silence filled the air between them, the hum of the powerful engine, the only sound cutting through the tension. Nkechi kept stealing nervous, hesitant glances at him from the passenger seat, her mind absolutely spinning with a million burning questions she didn't know how to ask. Mr. A4 also had a million questions for her, wanting to know every detail of her suffering, but neither of them knew exactly where to begin after so many years of silence. Finally, breaking the heavy tension, Nkechi spoke softly, her voice barely carrying over the quiet air conditioning. Where exactly are we going, A4? This isn't the way to my neighborhood. Mr. A4 kept his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead, a small knowing smile playing on his lips. We are going to my house, he replied simply. Then, he added casually, as if it were no big deal, while you were recovering in the hospital over the past few days, I managed to secure a small, quiet place for us to stay. Nkechi quietly replied, okay, trusting him implicitly. But not long after, the car left the busy commercial road and turned into an entirely different, heavily guarded area of the city. Everything there looked staggeringly beautiful, a complete contrast to the dusty, crowded neighborhoods she was used to. The streets were immaculately clean, lined with lush green trees and quiet walkways. Massive, architectural masterpieces of houses stood proudly behind beautiful, high-security gates, and luxury cars could be seen parked in manicured driveways everywhere. Nkechi slowly turned toward the window, her jaw dropping slightly as she took in the sheer opulence of the neighborhood, and then she looked at Mr. A4 again in disbelief. She knew immediately, with her background in business administration, that the supposedly small place he had casually mentioned could not truly be small or simple. Even the smallest, most basic house in this ultra-exclusive diplomatic area would cost millions of dollars, a sum that was unimaginable to an ordinary citizen. But Mr. A4 said absolutely nothing, his expression serene as he simply kept driving through the winding, quiet streets of the elite estate. Soon the car slowed down and stopped directly in front of a massive, imposing electronic gate that looked like the entrance to a private fortress. Before Nkechi could even utter a single word of inquiry, the gate opened automatically with a quiet whir, and the car slowly entered the grand compound. Nkechi's eyes moved around in absolute silence, her mind struggling to process the scale of what she was seeing. The immaculate compound alone looked bigger and more luxurious than some of the five-star hotels she had seen from afar. When the car finally came to a smooth stop in the massive driveway, Mr. Afer quickly came down from the driver's seat and walked around to her side, opening her door with extreme care. "Take your time, don't rush," he said tenderly, extending his hand to help her step down onto the pristine pavement. Then he gently supported her as they slowly walked toward the grand double doors of the house, which opened into a world she never could have imagined. As soon as they stepped inside the foyer, Nkechi became completely speechless, her breath leaving her entirely as her eyes darted around the magnificent space. Everything around her looked breathtakingly beautiful. The soaring ceilings, the glittering crystal lights, the premium Italian furniture, and the exquisite decorations. Everything looked devastatingly expensive, curated with an eye for absolute luxury that made her feel like she had stepped into a palace. Mr. Afer did not stop to admire the living room. Instead, he carefully led her up the sweeping marble staircase and opened the door to one of the massive, sun-drenched master bedrooms. "This room is entirely yours, Nkechi," he said softly, gesturing to the king-sized bed adorned with silk sheets. Then he showed her the attached private bathroom, ensuring she had everything she needed. "Take a warm bath, freshen up, and relax," he told her with a gentle smile. "I will drive out quickly to get some proper nutritious food for you from a good restaurant." Nkechi looked at him quietly, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Okay, Afor, thank you," she replied softly. Immediately after ensuring she was comfortable, Mr. Afor turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Moments later, sitting on the edge of the plush bed, she heard the distant, powerful sound of his luxury car driving out of the grand compound, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Nkechi slowly stood up, looking around the magnificent bedroom again, still pinching herself to ensure she wasn't trapped in a beautiful dream. Then she slowly walked into the attached bathroom, and as soon as she stepped inside, she stopped dead in her tracks for a moment, her mind completely blown. The bathroom was absolutely massive, larger than the entire apartment she had been renting, and everything inside looked sleek, modern, and incredibly luxurious. At the very center of this space was a large, state-of-the-art jacuzzi bathtub, surrounded by premium marble and high-end gold fixtures that gleamed in the light. Nkechi slowly walked over, stretching out a trembling hand to touch a part of the smooth porcelain, her mind struggling to accept that this place was real and that she was allowed to be here. Soon she finished bathing, the warm, pulsing water relaxing her tired muscles and making her feel significantly stronger and more alert than she had in months. As she dried herself and put on a plush robe, a powerful, uncontrollable curiosity slowly filled her mind, overtaking her initial hesitation. So she stepped out of the bedroom, deciding to use his absence to look around the massive mansion properly and try to understand the reality of her new surroundings. As she walked slowly through the quiet corridors of the mansion, her bare feet sinking into the thick, expensive rugs, she kept looking around in absolute stunned silence. Eventually, her wandering led her downstairs, and she entered the massive kitchen, which was a chef's dream, filled with high-end stainless steel appliances and custom cabinetry. The kitchen alone looked significantly bigger than the entire multi-family apartment building she used to live in during her darkest days. She slowly walked toward the large, pristine kitchen island in the center of the room, stretching out her hand to touch the polished stone surface gently as a wave of emotion washed over her. Then, vivid, heartbreaking memories filled her mind, taking her back to their humble beginnings. Years ago, in his cramped, stifling one-room apartment, she and Afor used to sit together on the floor, sharing a single plate of food and talking passionately about a life just like this. They had dreamed of a better life, a successful life where they wouldn't have to worry about food, a peaceful and luxurious home where they could build a family together in safety. Back then, surrounded by poverty and lack, it had only been a distant, wild dream that kept their spirits alive in the dark. But now, standing in this reality, she realized that Mr. Afor was living that exact dream for real, possessing a wealth that defied imagination. Then one terrifying, profound question entered her mind deeply, casting a shadow of intense intrigue over her awe. How on earth did Afor become this unbelievably wealthy in such a short period of time? while Ninkechi stood there wondering, her eyes keeping an anxious watch on the grand surroundings. She was still desperately trying to understand everything she was seeing. This simply cannot be real. I must be dreaming, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling in the empty, luxurious kitchen. Just then, the heavy sound of the mansion's main entrance door opening echoed through the house, breaking her trance. Her body froze for a split second, her heart leaping into her throat as she realized he was back. She slowly walked out of the kitchen, her steps hesitant as she moved toward the grand living room area. And there he was, Mr. Afor, having just returned from buying premium food from a high-end restaurant in the city. He walked into the living room calmly, carrying several neatly packed insulated bags, and placed them gently on the large dining table. I got us some fresh, healthy food, he said softly, looking up and catching her eye. Nkechi stood there near the entrance of the living room, watching him in silence, her heart absolutely full of burning questions, but her mouth remained completely silent for a moment. Afor walked closer to her, his expression warm and caring as he said, "Let's eat first, my dear, and then right after, I will give you your doctor-prescribed medicine." He began arranging the gourmet food on the table, pulling out a heavy, comfortable chair for her with practiced chivalry. "Come, sit down," he said invitingly. But Ninkechi did not move an inch from where she stood, her eyes fixed firmly on him. No, she looked at the expensive food, then she looked deeply into his eyes, her expression hardening into one of absolute resolve. Then she finally spoke, her voice cutting through the silence of the room. "No, Afor," she said quietly but firmly. Afor paused mid-motion, a look of surprise crossing his features. "What do you mean, no, Nkechi? You need to eat to regain your strength." But she shook her head slowly, her gaze unwavering. "No, I will not touch a single bite of this food until you sit down and tell me absolutely everything." She pointed slightly at him, her voice trembling with years of suppressed confusion and hurt. "What happened to you, Afor? Why did you completely disappear from my life after just 2 months abroad? How, in the name of God, did you become this obscurely rich while I was losing everything?" A heavy, suffocating silence filled the grand room, the unresolved mystery of the past years finally demanding a confrontation. Afer closed his eyes for a long moment, a deep sigh escaping his lips as he realized there was no way around it anymore. The time for secrets was over. He pulled out a chair for himself and sat down slowly, looking up at her with an expression of profound vulnerability. "I will tell you absolutely everything you need to know right now, Ninkechi, I promise. But I need you to please sit down first so you don't strain your body." She looked at him for a second, sensing his honesty, and then she walked closer and sat down in the chair opposite him, her eyes locked onto his face. Then he took a slow, deep breath, stabilizing his emotions. "Okay," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of truth. "I will tell you everything that happened from the moment I arrived overseas, and I need you to listen to me carefully." Ifor leaned across the table, his eyes locked onto Nkechi's as he prepared to recount the harrowing turning point that had shattered their communication and almost destroyed his soul. "Do you remember that fateful morning, exactly 2 months after I arrived in the United Kingdom?" he began, his voice dropping to a low, intense frequency that resonated through the quiet room. Nkechi stayed completely quiet, her body tensing as her mind raced back through the years, remembering the exact day her world began to crumble into an abyss of silence. "Yes, I remember it like it was yesterday, Afor," she whispered, her hands tightly gripping the fabric of her robe. Afor nodded slowly, the painful memory clearly etched into his handsome features as he continued. "You called me that morning from Abuja, just as you always did before your shift, and you told me all about your day. I told you that I was frantically rushing to catch the morning train to campus because I had an important exam and could not afford to miss it." Nkechi nodded again, tears welling up in her eyes as she recalled the casual, loving nature of that final conversation. Afor leaned forward slightly, his eyes reflecting the deep trauma of what followed. "That morning, I ran into the crowded train station, pushing through the massive sea of commuters, just trying not to be late. I managed to squeeze myself into the carriage just as the doors were closing, completely breathless but relieved that I had made it. Later that afternoon, during our long lecture break, I wanted to call you back to tell you how the exam went. I instinctively reached into my coat pocket to grab my phone, but my hand met nothing but empty fabric." Kichi's eyes widened slightly in realization as Afor continued quickly, his voice tight with the memory of that past panic. "I checked my leather bag, I turned all my pockets inside out. I ran all the way back to the university classroom and searched every single corner, under the desks, everywhere, but it was completely gone. Then it hit me like a physical blow, he said slowly, looking at her with a look of lingering despair. The last place I remembered holding it was inside that chaotic, overcrowded train. I think it must have slipped out of my shallow pocket when I was shoved by the crowd trying to board the train. After that single tragic moment, everything in my life changed in an instant. I had absolutely no way to call you, no way to reach you across the ocean, because I had lost all my contacts, your phone number, your email address. Everything was stored only on that device, and I didn't have it memorized in my head. I went back to that train station many times over the next few weeks, speaking with the lost and found department, trying desperately to track down that same train carriage, but it was completely hopeless. I thought about sending traditional letters to your apartment, but I knew the postal system was unreliable, and it might not even reach you. I was so terrified that you would think I had abandoned you. Silence filled the luxurious dining room again as Nkechi covered her mouth, the staggering simplicity of the misunderstanding breaking her heart. Then Afer spoke softly, his voice trembling. For a long, agonizing time I was completely alone in a strange land, crying myself to sleep every night. But I knew I had to keep moving forward for the sake of the sacrifice you had made for me. I finished my master's program with top honors, and through some highly influential professors I met at school, I managed to secure a decent entry-level job at a firm. The job helped me survive and pay for a tiny apartment. But after working 9 hours every day, instead of resting, myself and 2 brilliant friends from university stayed up all night working on a small, revolutionary tech idea in my kitchen. Nkechi asked quietly, her curiosity piqued despite her sorrow. A tech idea? Afer nodded firmly, a spark of pride returning to his eyes. Yes. We worked on an innovative software application after our official corporate jobs, pouring every extra hour and ounce of energy into it, every single day for over a year. At first it was incredibly small, operating out of a cramped room, but the software was so powerful that it kept growing exponentially through word of mouth. Then, it became very big, attracting the attention of major venture capitalists in London. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. And then, Nkechi? She leaned forward slightly, her breath caught in her throat. How big a four? She asked. Afor looked at her with absolute seriousness. Big enough that we all permanently left our corporate jobs because the automated revenue the tech company was making in a single week was more than we could ever earn in several years of hard labor. As time passed, it became an absolute giant in the industry, and after about 2 years of running it, an international tech conglomerate offered to buy us out completely. Nkechi asked quickly, her voice full of awe, "You sold it?" Afer nodded. Yes. We all wanted different things out of life and were completely exhausted from the grind, so we sold the company to the conglomerate. It was a very big, staggering amount of money split between the 3 of us. That was the exact moment I became a billionaire, and that was when I immediately decided to pack my bags and come back home to Nigeria to find you. But there is something else you need to know, Nkechi, he said, his voice dropping as he prepared to reveal a detail that would introduce a dark shadow into the narrative. Then Nkechi looked up, her eyes scanning his face. Afer continued, a year after I finished my master's degree, before the tech company became huge, my close friend, the same one who had introduced me to the scholarship program, was preparing to permanently return to Nigeria. I gave him a large amount of money and a detailed message to deliver to you, instructing him to go directly to your old apartment complex, find you, and tell you that I was alive, that I lost my phone, and that I was coming back for you. When he returned to the UK a few weeks later, he looked me in the eye and told me a devastating lie. He said he went to your old place, but the landlord told him you had packed your things and moved away with a wealthy man, leaving no forwarding address. After that day, I kept wondering with a broken heart what had truly happened to you, wondering if you had forgotten our love and moved on with your life. But I still couldn't stop looking for you. And then, when I finally saw you again at that hotel 4 days ago, his voice became incredibly soft, thick with tears. You were wearing a faded uniform, cleaning rooms for abusive strangers, and that exact moment completely broke me inside. Nkechi, please, I need you to tell me the absolute truth, he asked with deep pain in his eyes. What really happened to you while I was away? Why did my friend lie to me, and how did your life fall to this point? Nkechi stayed completely quiet for a long time, her gaze dropping to her trembling hands as she braced herself to reveal the dark, agonizing truth about the antagonist of their story. Then slowly she adjusted herself on the luxury chair, her eyes becoming incredibly serious, devoid of the previous weakness as a cold fire ignited in her pupils. I will tell you everything, Afor, and it is time you know the true face of the person you called your friend, she began slowly, her voice low and heavy with the trauma of betrayal. After you left for the UK, everything was completely fine at first, and I lived every day counting down the hours until our phone calls. But after those 2 months passed, I suddenly could not reach you ever again. My hands would shake as I dialed your foreign number again and again, day and night. But it was constantly unavailable, never going through. I became so deeply worried that I couldn't eat or sleep, constantly watching the news, terrified that something horrible had happened to you in that distant country. I kept thinking you would find a way to contact me, praying every morning that a letter or a call would come through, because I really, really missed you, Afor. Afor's face stayed entirely still, but a look of profound, agonizing pain showed in his eyes as he imagined her suffering. Nkechi took a slow, agonizingly deep breath and continued the narrative, unmasking the villain. Some months into the silence, the local company I worked for suffered a catastrophic financial collapse due to a massive fraud scandal among the directors. The business went completely down. They said they could not continue operations, so they started letting all the staff go immediately, giving us nothing but a tiny, insulting severance payment that couldn't even cover 2 months of standard living expenses. The tragic reality was that the only substantial money I had possessed before that collapse was the massive savings I had selflessly given to you for your travel and visa expenses. Afor looked at her, his heart shattering as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in the most horrific way. Nkechi added softly, "So when they paid me that tiny severance, I sat in my room and calculated my expenses. I knew that if I used that money to renew the expensive rent on my apartment, I would be left completely broke with no money for food. So I made the difficult choice to pack my belongings and move to a much smaller, dilapidated one-room apartment in a dangerous slum area of the city, just so I could have a little cash left to survive while I frantically looked for another job. I packed my things in the dead of night and left the complex, which is why your friend found the apartment empty. But he didn't have to look far to find me, because he already knew exactly where I went." Afor leaned forward sharply, his eyes narrowing as a dangerous anger began to brew beneath his sophisticated exterior. "What do you mean he knew where you went, Nkechi?" he asked, his voice dripping with sudden intrigue. Nkechi looked at him, her tears drying as the memory of the ultimate betrayal took over. "A year after you left, your so-called best friend Chidi came to my new impoverished home. He didn't come to deliver any money or any message from you, Afor. He came there driving a nice car, wearing expensive clothes, looking down on me with an arrogant, disgusting smile. He walked into my small room and told me that you had officially become a wealthy man overseas, but that you had completely forgotten about me. He told me that you were living in a luxury mansion in London, and were already engaged to a wealthy white woman, laughing at my foolishness for giving you my life savings." Afor's hands tightened into white-knuckled fists on the table. The sheer, demonic cruelty of his friend's actions hit him like a tidal wave. Nkechi's voice shook with remembered humiliation as she exposed Chidi's true antagonist nature. He looked at my desperate situation, looked at my empty kitchen, and then he made a disgusting proposal. He told me that since you had abandoned me like a piece of trash, I should become his secret mistress. He said he would pay my rent and buy me clothes only if I agreed to sleep with him, and humiliate myself for his pleasure. He mocked our love, calling you a fraud who used my innocence to escape poverty. I looked him dead in the eye, despite the hunger in my stomach and the despair in my heart, and I stood true to my principles. I slapped him across his face and threw him out of my room, screaming that I would rather starve to death than betray my dignity or my love for you. Chidi laughed hysterically as he walked out, shouting that he would make sure I suffered in this city, promising that he would use his corporate connections to ensure no reputable company would ever hire me. And he kept his wicked promise Afor. Every single time I went for a job interview at a good firm, the managers would initially be impressed by my resume, but a day later they would call me to say the position had been suddenly filled. I later found out from a sympathetic secretary that Chidi had been calling these companies, spreading malicious lies, that I was a thief and a fraud who ruined her previous employer. completely blacklisting me from the professional industry. The viewer should feel an overwhelming sense of burning injustice at this moment, witnessing how a pure, kind-hearted woman was systematically destroyed by a jealous, vengeful villain simply because she refused to compromise her morality. Nkechi stopped for a moment, her breathing heavily labored as the emotional weight of the story took a physical toll on her fragile, recovering body, but she forced herself to continue. I started looking for any manual labor, just to buy a single meal a day, but there was absolutely nothing available for a blacklisted woman. I swallowed my pride completely, walking from street to street, begging for house-cleaning jobs, but the money was barely enough to survive. Every single place I went, the door was slammed in my face, and the stress began to take a heavy toll on my health. Then, one catastrophic afternoon, the final blow fell upon my life. I was walking back from a grueling, unsuccessful informal job interview at a small warehouse, feeling completely dehydrated and dizzy from not eating for 2 days. Suddenly, a sharp, blinding pain exploded inside my chest, making it impossible to breathe. The entire street started spinning around me. My vision went completely black, and I collapsed heavily onto the hard, dusty road, completely unresponsive. A4 sat completely still, his face a mask of pure agony as he listened to the horrors his love had endured while he was living a life of privilege abroad. Nekichi's voice shook violently as she reached the climax of her sorrowful tale. A kind stranger saw my lifeless body on the road and rushed me to a public hospital. When I woke up hours later, the doctors ran tests and told me the devastating news that I had a severe internal illness that required immediate, highly expensive surgery. They told me that if the surgery wasn't performed quickly, my organs would eventually fail, but I sat on that hospital bed and looked at my empty bank account, knowing I couldn't even afford a proper plate of food, let alone a multi-million kobo medical procedure. I left the public hospital against medical advice because I couldn't pay the basic admission fee, and that was the exact moment of absolute desperation when I decided to take the grueling, low-paying cleaning job at that hotel. I knew the manual labor was slowly killing me, compounding my internal illness, but I had no choice. I had to act completely strong, masking my excruciating physical pain with a fake smile every single morning. I went to work every day, scrubbing toilets, wiping floors, and enduring the verbal abuse of arrogant hotel guests, just so I could buy food to survive another day and desperately try to save an impossible amount of money for the surgery. I paused, she said, looking at A4 with eyes full of a profound, beautiful weariness. But deep down inside my soul, I knew it was a losing battle. No common cleaning job could ever give me that kind of massive money and time. My health was deteriorating rapidly, and I knew that it was only a matter of weeks before my body finally gave out completely, so I just kept going day after day, waiting for the end, praying to God that if I died, you would somehow know that I never stopped loving you. Afer slowly looked away, his entire body trembling with a mixture of profound sorrow for her suffering and an absolutely terrifying murderous rage directed toward his former friend, Chidi. His heart felt incredibly heavy, a suffocating darkness clouding his thoughts as he realized the sheer magnitude of the injustice that had been perpetrated against the most innocent soul he had ever known. After a long, heavy moment of silence, he turned back to her, his eyes brimming with tears as he reached across the table and took her frail hands in his. "I am so incredibly sorry, Nkechi," he said, his voice cracking with an intense emotional agony. "I am sorry that my ambition took me away from you, and I am sorry that a monster I called a friend inflicted such horror upon your life while I was living in ignorance overseas." Nkechi quickly shook her head, a soft, beautiful smile breaking through her tears as she squeezed his hands with what little strength she had. "No, Afor, please listen to me. It is absolutely not your fault," she said firmly, her voice filled with a pure, unconditional forgiveness that only a truly kind soul could possess. "It was just the cruel hand of life. Unexpected things happen to the best of us, but we somehow survived it, and against all mathematical odds, God brought you back to me. If we were not truly meant to be together in this life, our paths would have never crossed in that random hotel room 4 days ago. Everything happens for a reason." Afor became completely quiet, the chaotic storm in his mind settling into a cold, calculated focus as he stared at her deeply. "Maybe you are right, my love," he said slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous hidden undertone that signaled the calm before an absolute storm. "Maybe all of this was not just a random coincidence or a technical glitch at the 5-star hotel. Maybe it was destiny bringing me back to right the wrongs. and ensure that justice is finally served. I am a billionaire now, Nkechi, and I swear to you on my life, the people who caused your tears will soon weep tears of blood, and the villain of our story will realize that karma never forgets a debt. For the next 2 weeks, the luxurious mansion in Abuja became a fortress of healing for Nkechi, but beneath the surface of this peaceful recovery, a dark and intricate web of suspense and strategic vengeance was being woven by Mr. Afor. While Nkechi spent her days resting comfortably under the care of a private nutritionist and a personal nurse hired by Afor, the billionaire spent his hours in his home office, his eyes fixed on cold digital screens as he orchestrated a silent, calculated trap for the man who had systematically destroyed his fiancée's life. He contacted the most elite private intelligence firm in Nigeria, throwing boundless amounts of money at them to uncover every single detail about Chidi's current financial status, his business partnerships, and his personal life. Within 48 hours, a thick confidential dossier landed on Afor's desk, and what he read inside made his blood run cold, revealing the true, grotesque face of the antagonist, who was currently celebrating his unearned success. Chidi had used the very corporate connections he boasted about to climb the social ladder, eventually becoming a majority shareholder in a prominent real estate and logistic conglomerate in Abuja. He was living a life of extreme luxury, hosting lavish parties, driving imported sports cars, and treating his employees like dirt, completely oblivious to the fact that the ghost of his past betrayal was watching his every move from the shadows. The dossier also revealed a critical vulnerability. Chidi's company was currently in a desperate situation, on the very brink of bankruptcy due to aggressive, high-risk expansions. They were frantically seeking a multi-million-dollar offshore investor to buy out their massive debt and save them from public ruin. Afor stared at the financial reports, a slow, terrifying smile creeping onto his face as he realized that karma had handed him the perfect weapon to execute an absolute masterpiece of poetic justice. He immediately established a highly secretive, elite offshore shell corporation based in London, naming it Vanguard Global Holdings, and positioned himself as the anonymous, shadowy principal investor represented only by a team of high-powered, ruthless corporate attorneys. He instructed his legal team to approach Chidi's failing conglomerate with an incredibly lucrative, almost unbelievable offer to inject $10 million into their business, effectively purchasing a 60% controlling stake in the company. When Chidi received the formal proposal from Vanguard Global Holdings, he was absolutely ecstatic, completely blinded by greed and the desperate desire to maintain his high society lifestyle. He believed that a wealthy foreign savior had dropped from the heavens to cement his status as a corporate titan. For days, Chidi celebrated his impending victory in the most arrogant manner, bragging to his business associates and humiliating his staff, completely unaware that he was eagerly walking straight into a financial noose tightly held by the very man he had betrayed years ago. Tension began to build to an unbearable peak as the secret corporate maneuvers progressed, with Afor deliberately stalling the final contract signing, feeding Chidi's anxiety and forcing the villain to compromise more and more of his personal assets as collateral to secure the foreign funding. Afor watched through hidden surveillance reports as Chidi signed away his luxury cars, his personal properties, and his remaining shares to satisfy the stringent preconditions set by Vanguard Global Holdings, effectively putting his entire life savings on the line. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Nkechi remained completely in the dark about Afor's covert operations, her pure, kind heart focused only on her physical recovery, and her immense gratitude for the second chance at life she had been given. Every evening, Afor would completely mask his cold, vengeful determination the moment he stepped out of his office, transforming back into the gentle, doting partner who brought her medicine, cooked her meals, and held her tightly as they watched movies. But the contrast between his tenderness with Nkechi and his ruthless machinations against Chidi was staggering, creating an underlying atmosphere of intense suspense that would keep any viewer glued to the screen. One afternoon, while Nkechi was taking a walk in the manicured gardens, Afor received a frantic phone call from his lead attorney, confirming that Chidi had officially signed all the preliminary agreements, putting his entire financial existence in a stranglehold. "He took the bait completely, sir," the attorney whispered over the secure line. "Chidi has legally bound himself and his company to a mandatory in-person boards meeting this Friday morning, at the prestigious Diamond Corporate Tower to finalize the wire transfer. He has no idea who owns Vanguard Global Holdings. Afor's grip on the phone tightened, a dangerous icy fire burning in his eyes as he stood by the window, watching his beautiful fiancée smile at a butterfly in the garden below. Excellent, Afor replied, his voice dripping with an icy calculated calm that signaled the absolute end for his enemy. Send out the official invitations for the final board meeting, and make sure Chidi is told that the primary billionaire principal investor of Vanguard Global Holdings will be arriving in person to sign the final documents and unmask himself. Tell him to prepare a grand reception for his savior. As the fateful Friday approached, the narrative tension reached a fever pitch, the suspense tightening like a piano wire as the true, ugly face of the villain was showcased one last time. The private investigators captured footage of Chidi visiting an ultra-expensive boutique, buying a custom designer suit for the meeting, and loudly boasting to the tailors that he was about to become one of the most powerful, untouchable billionaires in the country. He even made a casual, derogatory comment to a low-wage janitor who accidentally bumped into him at the store, shouting at the poor man, "Get out of my way, you pathetic loser, do you know who I am? No. People like you are destined to scrub floors forever, while men like me rule the world." This disgusting display of arrogance and classism would make the viewers absolutely loathe Chidi, eagerly, desperately awaiting the moment when his golden tower would be violently shattered into pieces by the hands of justice. Little did the villain know, the very woman he had blacklisted, the very woman he had tried to force into becoming his submissive mistress through economic starvation, was currently living in a mansion 10 times grander than his own, protected by a man whose wealth could crush his entire existence in a single day. Afor spent the night before the meeting meticulously organizing the final details of the confrontation, coordinating with the hotel where Nkechi used to work and arranging for a very specific, shocking element to be present at the climax. He sat at his desk late into the night, holding the modest engagement ring he had given Nkechi years ago, alongside the glittering new diamond ring he planned to present to her. Realizing that the circle of karma was finally about to close, on the morning of the grand board meeting, the atmosphere in Abuja was thick with anticipation. The heavy gray clouds mimicking the storm that was about to break over Chidi's unsuspecting head. Afor woke up early, kissing a sleeping Nkechi softly on her forehead before dressing himself in a flawless bespoke charcoal suit that commanded absolute power and authority, fitting for a global tycoon. He stepped into his luxury vehicle, flanked by a security detail of 4 black SUVs filled with stone-faced security guards, and drove toward the Diamond Corporate Tower where Chidi was already waiting, pacing the penthouse boardroom like a restless, greedy predator. Chidi had ordered premium champagne, expensive catering, and had forced his remaining terrified board members to stand in a neat line to welcome the anonymous billionaire investor who was about to save their company. His heart was pounding with a mixture of intense greed and arrogant pride, his mind already calculating how he would use the $10 million to crush his competitors and humiliate anyone who had ever doubted him. He kept checking his luxury gold watch every few seconds, his arrogance radiating through the room as he barked orders at the secretarial staff, completely unaware that outside the glass building, a convoy of black SUVs was pulling up to the curb. Mr. Aforokik stepped out of the vehicle, his polished shoes hitting the pavement with a heavy, deliberate thud, his face a mask of absolute terrifying calm as he walked into the lobby, ready to unleash a wave of poetic justice that would leave the entire corporate world in absolute shock. The heavy mahogany doors of the penthouse boardroom swung open with a dramatic thud, and the room instantly fell into a breathless, expectant silence as Mr. Afor Okake stepped inside, flanked by a phalanx of stone-faced corporate lawyers. Chidi, who had been holding a glass of premium champagne, instantly stood up straight, a wide, sycophantic grin plastered across his face as he prepared to greet the anonymous savior who held the $10 million lifeline for his collapsing company. He walked forward with his hand eagerly extended, his eyes fixed on the tailored luxury suit of the billionaire before him, completely blinded by his own greed and arrogance. But as Afor stepped fully into the bright light of the boardroom and took off his dark designer sunglasses, Chidi's extended hand froze mid-air, the plastic smile evaporating from his lips as his entire body went rigidly still. The color completely drained from Chidi's face, turning him a ghostly, sickly pale. As his eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing horror, He gasped for air, his throat tightening as his mind violently rejected the reality standing right in front of him. It was Afor, the very friend he had deliberately deceived. The man he thought was stuck across the ocean, the man whose life savings he had stolen via Nkechi, now standing before him as the absolute ruler of Vanguard Global Holdings. Afor did not take Chidi's hand. Instead, he walked past him with a terrifying, ice-cold indifference, pulling out the heavy leather chair at the head of the boardroom table and sitting down with an aura of supreme, absolute authority. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the sharp, panicked hyperventilation of Chidi, who felt the entire floor tilting beneath his expensive shoes as a wave of pure terror washed over his soul. Afor? No, this is impossible. You can't be here. You're supposed to be. Chidi stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whimper as his hands shook violently, spilling champagne onto the pristine glass table. Afor leaned back slowly in his chair, folding his hands together as he stared at his former friend with a gaze so lethal, so devoid of human warmth, that it made the board members shiver in fear. Did you honestly think your grotesque lies would stay buried forever, Chidi? Afor asked, his voice calm, low, and dripping, with a terrifying calculated venom that cut through the room like a scalpel. Did you truly believe you could blacklist the woman I love? Try to force her into becoming your submissive mistress through economic starvation? And then parade around this city with your unearned wealth without facing the ultimate reckoning? Hearing these words, the remaining board members gasped, whispering in absolute shock as they realized the heinous, criminal nature of their chairman's past actions. Chidi dropped his champagne glass, the expensive crystal shattering into a million pieces on the floor, symbolizing the permanent destruction of his golden tower as he realized he had walked directly into an absolute financial execution. Panic turned into absolute, unadulterated desperation as Chidi realized the true magnitude of his vulnerability. He had signed away his luxury cars, his personal real estate properties, and his remaining corporate shares as mandatory collateral just to secure this meeting. He fell to his knees right there on the shattered glass, completely losing any shred of his former corporate dignity, crying tears of absolute humiliation as he crawled toward the head of the table like a beaten dog. Afor, please, I beg of you, listen to me. It was all a massive misunderstanding. I was just trying to protect her. The economy was bad. Chidi wept hysterically, reaching out to grab the hem of Afor's trousers. But a security guard instantly stepped forward, pinning the villain to the floor with brutal efficiency. Afor looked down at the weeping, pathetic creature with an expression of pure disgust, signaling his lead attorney to open a thick leather folder and distribute official documents to the entire room. As of exactly 9 o'clock this morning, Vanguard Global Holdings has legally executed the non-compliance clauses in the preliminary agreements you so eagerly signed, Afor declared, his voice booming through the boardroom like a thunderclap of poetic justice. Because you lied on your corporate financial disclosures, your entire company is now officially bankrupt and every single asset you pledged as collateral, your mansion, your luxury vehicles, your bank accounts, has been permanently seized by my corporation. You own absolutely nothing, Chidi. You are completely ruined, destitute, and blacklisted from the global business community forever, just as you tried to do to Nkechi. The complete triumph of justice was magnificent, a breathtaking moment of pure exposure where the arrogant antagonist was utterly unmasked, humiliated, and reduced to absolute zero in front of the very colleagues he had spent years terrorizing. Chidi screamed in agony, pulling at his hair as he realized that his greed had blinded him into signing his own economic death warrant, his voice echoing through the penthouse as the reality of his total downfall set in. Please, Afor, we were brothers. You can't leave me on the streets. I will apologize to Nkechi on my knees. I will do anything. Chidi howled, snot and tears mixing on his face, as he begged for a mercy he had never once shown to a single human being. Afor stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket with a cold, elegant precision that signaled the absolute end of the discussion, looking down at the broken villain one final time. You are completely unworthy of her name, and you are entirely too late for apologies. Look out the window, Chidi, because your new reality has arrived, Afor said with an icy finality as the heavy double doors of the boardroom opened once more. 2 uniformed police officers walked inside, accompanied by agents from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Bureau, carrying an official warrant for Chidi's immediate arrest due to the corporate fraud uncovered by Afor's private investigators. As the iron handcuffs clicked tightly around Chidi's trembling wrists, he was dragged out of the Diamond Corporate Tower in absolute disgrace, screaming and kicking like a child, leaving Mr. Afur Okake standing tall at the apex of complete undeniable victory. As the doors of the police transport vehicle slammed shut on Chidi, a profound cleansing silence fell over the life of Mr. Afur Okake, marking the definitive dawn of a beautiful new chapter. The harsh and uncompromising wheel of karma had turned fully, dealing a crushing, irreversible blow to the antagonist who had let greed and malice consume his soul. Stripped of his stolen wealth, his assets permanently liquidated to cover his corporate frauds, and facing a lengthy, humiliating prison sentence, Chidi was cast out into absolute ruin, an object of public scorn, and a living testament to the dangers of treachery. But for the kind and resilient heroes of our story, justice brought an outpouring of healing, peace, and unparalleled abundance that completely erased the scars of their painful past. Nkechi, now fully restored to vibrant health through the advanced medical care Afor provided, finally learned the truth of his absolute triumph over the forces that had sought to destroy her. Standing together in the magnificent living room of their Abuja mansion, Afor took her hands in his, looking deep into her eyes with a love that had survived time, distance, and the cruelest betrayals. He slid a flawless new diamond ring onto her finger. Their subsequent wedding was a glorious, breathtaking celebration of love and loyalty, attended by the very society that had once ignored Nkechi's struggles, forcing everyone to witness her complete elevation from a humble hotel cleaner to the revered queen of a billionaire's global empire. Together, they didn't just build a life of extreme material comfort. They transformed their wealth into a powerful tool for good, establishing a nationwide foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable women from economic exploitation and blacklisting. Nkechi ran her own flourishing logistics business, thriving as an independent, intelligent entrepreneur just as she had always dreamed, proving that a pure soul paired with resilience can never be permanently defeated by the machinations of the wicked. As they stood on the balcony of their estate watching the African sun set in a brilliant tapestry of gold and crimson, they realized their journey had come a full, beautiful circle, built on a foundation of unbreakable trust and ultimate sacrifice. This powerful, emotional story leaves us with an enduring, philosophical life lesson that every viewer watching this video should carry deep within their heart. Life, in its mysterious way, may separate us from the people we love, change our circumstances in ways we never expected, and allow us to face seasons of intense trial and injustice. But it reminds us that genuine love, grounded in loyalty, patience, and moral integrity, possesses an indestructible strength that can endure even when the entire world falls apart. True wealth is not merely measured by the billions sitting in a bank account, but by the purity of our character, the strength of our promises, and the kindness we show to others when they have nothing to give in return. Let this narrative be a warning to the arrogant and a sanctuary of hope for the broken-hearted. Karma never forgets a single action. And what looks like a painful delay is often life preparing you for a destiny far deeper and more magnificent than you could ever imagine. Now, dear lovely viewers, we would absolutely love to hear from you and read your heartfelt thoughts on this unforgettable journey. Do you believe that true love and loyalty can genuinely survive the test of time, distance, and such malicious betrayal in today's world? Have you ever witnessed the powerful, poetic hand of karma righting a terrible wrong in your own life or the lives of those around you? Please share your incredible insights, stories, and personal opinions in the comment section below, as I genuinely love reading and responding to what you think. If Afofor and Nkechi's triumphant story touched your heart, brought tears to your eyes, or inspired you to believe in justice, please support us by clicking the like button right now. Share this video with your family, friends, and loved ones so they also be uplifted by this beautiful message of hope, resilience, and love. More intensely emotional, dramatic, and instructive life stories are coming to this channel very soon, and you will not want to miss a single one. Make sure you support